what is spiritualism? And, do you think spiritualism has gotten associated with a certain age bracket, whereas the younger population in the world is still busy sinning rather than getting into the spiritual way of life?
Well, again, first of all, thank you, Navika, for having me. I don't refer to myself as a guru. I'm a medical doctor with an interest in what we call the evolution of consciousness. These days, it's become very fashionable to say, I'm spiritual and not religious. So what is spirituality? It is, in one simple word, self-awareness. Self-awareness. Having said that, most people do not know what the self is. They confuse it with their selfie. So we have sacrificed ourselves for our selfies, which means our ego identities, which are provisional. Ultimately, spiritual experience and religious experience are the same thing. They have three components. Number one, what we call transcendence. In Sanskrit, it's called turiya, going beyond the sensory experience that gives us the experience of perceptual reality. Turiya means going beyond the senses. In yoga, chit vritti nirod. So when all the vrittis, which are fluctuations of consciousness, die down, there is a domain of awareness which is beyond space and time. So that's called in English transcendence, in Sanskrit turiya. The second component of the religious experience or the spiritual experience, same thing, is what we call the emergence of Platonic values: truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity. And the third component is the loss of the fear of death, because the transcendent self is not in space-time. So this is the experience universally, whether it's Muhammad or Rumi or Hafiz or you might say, the great rishis of India, Mirabai, Atmanand Krishna Menon, Krishna Murthy. You talk about Ramana Maharishi, Vivekanand, Ramakrishna. This is what they were talking about. Now, if somebody gives you this insight, and you say, they're pointing to the moon, you should be looking at the moon instead of worshipping the finger. So religious ideology is not the same thing as religious experience. In fact, there's no system of thought. Religion, system of thought; science, system of thought; theology, system of thought; philosophy, system of thought. No system of thought can give you access to truth. You have to transcend thought, because thought is what separates us.
So how do you transcend thought?
You transcend thought in that second verse of the first chapter of Patanjali, Chit Vritti Nirod. You silence the mind. As Rumi said, God's language is silence, everything else is poor translation. So you have to silence the mind. And for that, we have so many techniques. There are meditations, there are mantra practices, there is something called vagal stimulation, but the 8 limbs of yoga, the yamas, the niyamas, yoga asana, because yoga asana cultivates awareness in the body, pranayam, which is using the breath to influence your autonomic nervous system, pratyahara, which is withdrawal of the senses, and actually a new understanding in science, something they call interoception. Perception is looking at the outside world. Interoception is knowing what's happening in your body. There are yogic techniques to do that are mentioned very briefly as aphorisms in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, but when you actually practice them, you realize that these yogis were on to something very profound, controlling the autonomic nervous system and eavesdropping literally on the cosmic consciousness. So beyond Turiya Tata, beyond that Bhagavad Chetna, beyond that Brahmi Chetna, these are all encapsulated in the 8 limbs of yoga, including Dharana, Dhyan, Samadhi.
And that's